What did I miss? Brian here, and I got a new set of gloves. Unfortunately, I lost my other pair of mechanics gloves. I had them for so many years, and now I can't find them, so had to buy replacements. Today, we're going to be talking about guide rods. It's disassembled, there's no mag, so it's unloaded and safe to work with. These are spring recoil guide rods. They're both Glock OEM from the factory. They look almost identical, except they're not. These are both completely different guide rods. This one came with my Gen 5 Glock 19, and this one I bought online, and I'm gonna set this off to the side for now. In one of my previous videos, I mentioned that one of the most common parts to get swapped out of a Glock is the barrel. But another part that tends to get swapped out is the guide rod. Now, this isn't just for the Glock 19s, like the Gen 3s, Gen 4s, Gen 5s. We're talking about all Glock owners, like the Glock 17, Glock 22, 23, Glock 26, you name it. And it would be all sorts of reasons as well. I've seen someone change theirs out because they wanted something more durable. I've seen someone else change theirs because they wanted to do a Gucci Glock build, which is fine. But the most common reason people want to change their guide rods is to reduce recoil. And so people will change out their stock guide rod for a third-party aftermarket brand out there, which is fine. They come in all sorts of materials, but the most common I've seen are tungsten and steel. I have seen titanium, but I don't see those as often as tungsten and stainless steel. Now, I thought about getting a tungsten guide rod myself, but two things held me back from buying one. One, tungsten guide rods range from $80 to $100, which is expensive and a waste of money, in my honest opinion. And two, I read online that tungsten guide rods don't really help all that much with the recoil. I was on the forums, and some people who own the tungsten guide rods have said that either the recoil felt the same or it helped with the recoil a bit, but not much, which goes back to number one, a waste of money. Then I decided to get a new guide rod. It looks like just another ordinary factory guide rod, and yes, it is. However, this is for the Gen 4 and Gen 5 Glock 23, and if you don't know anything about the Glock 23, it's the same size as the Glock 19. However, the Glock 19 shoots a 9mm and the Glock 23 shoots a 40 cal. It's got the exact dual spring setup. The guide rod is also plastic. However, the springs themselves are a lot stronger, and that's because the 40 cal is a heavier bullet than a 9mm. So why did I get this guide rod, and how did I know it was gonna work? Well, one of my friends, Ethan, has a Gen 4 Glock 23, and he brought it to the range with him one day. I got curious as I knew that the Glock 23 guide rod was stronger, and I wanted to try it in my Gen 5 Glock 19. He agreed, he let me do that. I put it in my gun, and when I shot it, I noticed a huge difference between my guide rod and the Glock 23 guide rod. This one's not his, obviously, but the recoil was noticeably softer. I was able to maintain control and keep my shots consistent, and that was enough for me to go out and buy one myself. Even he was surprised when I let him test fire it, and the best part is we did not have any stovepipes, misfires, jams, and this guide rod is only $32, and it's Glock OEM. It's just for a Glock 23. And so that is how I ended up with this guide rod. So enough about all of that. Let's go ahead and do a comparison between this and the original guide rod. Visually, you can't spot the differences as both guide rods are almost identical, so you have to pay really close attention to them. And the only way to spot the differences is if you put the two guide rods next to each other. And one of the things that I see right away is the bigger spring on the Glock 23 guide rod is a little bit longer than the one on the Glock 19, as you can see. Now, this is pretty small, but I will say this. This is the guide rod that came with my gun, and I put a decent amount of rounds through it. So there's a possibility that the bigger spring on the 19 guide rod was the same length as the one on the Glock 23 guide rod, but I could be wrong. Keeping the two next to each other, another thing I noticed is the plastic itself on the original guide rod is a lot more noticeable than the one on the new one. On the new one, there's a lot more spring coils visible and less plastic, whereas with the original, it's the other way around. Now, I don't think this really matters, but it's just another thing I noticed putting the two next to each other. I'm gonna move closer to the camera and flip to the bottom because this is where you can really tell the difference between the two. Both guide rods have a set of numbers at the bottom. The original has a 1 to the left and a 7 to the right, and the new one has a 0 to the left, a 3 at the bottom, and a 3 to the right. And even Ethan has these same exact numbers as well. So I don't know if this is a specific code for each guide rod, but this would be the best way to distinguish between the two. At least for me, it would be. And so these are the visual differences between the two guide rods, at least from what I was able to find. Let's see how they both perform down the range.
I've got 15 rounds in the mag and I'm shooting 115 grain rounds. With the stock Glock 19 guide rod, it's what you'd expect it to be. Now, if you own a Glock 9mm handgun, then you should know. If not, the recoil is moderate, not too soft and not too hard. As you can see, the gun kicks back just hard enough for me to have to readjust myself before pulling the trigger again. The muzzle rise, not too bad, but it's noticeable. I can work with it, but it can always be improved. With a Glock 23 guide rod, same thing, 115 grain rounds and 15 rounds in the mag. However, this time, the kick is softer, and as you can see, there's not a lot of muzzle rise. There's still some recoil, but it's easier to manage. I'm not having to readjust myself after each shot like how I did with the Glock 19 guide rod. Lastly, when I got this guide rod, I started with 115 grain rounds and it worked like normal, but to anyone who plans to get one, I would recommend starting with 124 grain or even 147 grain rounds to really break it in. With the Glock 19 guide rod, it's what came with the gun, so there shouldn't be any issues with fitting it in the slide. When pulling the slide back, you have to put some effort to pull it back to chamber in and around. Now, if you've been shooting guns for a while, it should be effortless. Other than that, there's not much else. As for the Glock 23 guide rod, it's the same size as the Glock 19 guide rod, so it fits with no problem, no modification required. Though you have to put in a little more effort to compress it to make it fit in the slide as well as pulling it back, and that's because the springs are a bit tougher. Other than that, it works just like normal.
And so, there you have it. Overall, I'm a lot happier with the Glock 23 guide rod as I got better results with it. It wasn't meant to work with my Glock 19, but it did. And so that is it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you're subscribed, thanks. If you're not, thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Take care, everyone. I will catch you on the flip side.